Selamat pagi from Washington, D.C., and good afternoon and good evening to everyone else. As I said, my name is Johanna Gao, and I am the Regional Director for the Asia Pacific at the International Republican Institute. We are so pleased you could all join us, and I'd like to start by thanking FPCI for convening this incredible gathering and for their partnership with us. Very briefly, if you are not familiar with IRI, we are a nonprofit, non-governmental, nonpartisan organization that focuses on supporting democratic development around the world. We currently operate in 85 countries, partnering with those who seek to advance democratic principles and practices for their communities, including civil society organizations, political parties, elected officials, government at all levels, and the media. We are particularly pleased to be supporting this panel on the topic of an emerging leaders dialogue, a discussion on the future of democracy, reform, and globalization after COVID-19. Within this very broad topic, we wanted to examine the possible trajectory of democracy and globalization in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And to do that, we've asked our panelists to frame their thinking today around the future in four broad themes. So first, geopolitics. What will be the impact of the pandemic on global issues such as great power rivalry and international cooperation? These are topics that I know have come up in previous sessions as well. Secondly, how to help shape the future for young people, because between the pandemic, climate change, financial crises, and other issues, young people are growing up in a world that could make them very apprehensive about their future. Third, what will effective governance look like in the future? Because with the pandemic, we've seen different levels of government perform differently in different countries. And at the same time, we've seen a rise around the world in mass protest movements of people seeking to protect their rights, such as in Hong Kong, Thailand, and Belarus. And then fourth, what is the role of technology in all of these things? And technology, I think, really serves as a through line for all of these topics. Now, our esteemed panel brings a variety of experiences and perspectives to these issues. And so I'm very pleased to introduce the panelists who will be with us. Some of them will be joining us shortly. First, His Excellency Ridwan Kamil, who is the Governor of West Java in Indonesia. Also, Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi, who is a Member of Parliament in India and the Deputy Leader of the Shiv Sena Party. Mr. Jamie Metzel, who is the founder and chair of OneShared.world and author of Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. And Mr. Emmanuel Ametepe, who is the executive director of Youth Advocates Ghana and the convener of the African Youth SDG Summit. Thank you to all of you for your participation, and we're looking forward to a really robust discussion. What we're going to do is start with some opening remarks from each panelist for about 2 minutes, and we've asked them to frame their opening remarks within the context of those four themes, and then we'll move into questions and discussions, and we will be very much working on staying within time. So with that, I would like to invite Governor Ridwan to please share his opening remarks. Thank you very much, sir. Oh, I thought we had him. Maybe we don't. We will hopefully get him back soon. So perhaps, Priyanka, would you be able to start us off, please?
Absolutely. I wish Governor was here to open his the remarks, beginning of the entire session. However, broadly speaking about the four topics that we are supposed to be covering within 2 minutes, what I'd like to say is the future at this point in time looks forward to a country and to governance which talks about youth, which talks about health, which talks about environment, which talks about issues that matter to the next gen. They are looking at, like you said very correctly, Johanna, that they're looking at very uncertain futures. They're looking at very uncertain democracies. They're looking at a world order which is changing constantly. And we are also seeing a time when there is a lot of confrontation because of the way COVID spread has happened. There are questions being asked of WHO. There are questions being asked of how the entire spread, the pandemic, hasn't yet been able to come under control. Economies have been devastated. So yes, the youth looks at its future with a lot of apprehension. And as government, we need to be very sensitive to what they expect of a better future and how we need to address those. So that, I think, would be the fulcrum of every single government across the world, across the globe. In India, I come from a or the huge impact of COVID-19. However, we managed to use technology and leverage it. So again, the technology, the fourth part of our discussion, will play a very important role in how democracies shape up, how we address concerns of the young. Democracy is shaping up. Social media has seen a very negative role and impact in various countries, and the interference of social media and opinions that have hugely divided people across the length and breadth of the countries, not just my country, but globally, is something which will be a matter of concern and should be up for debate, where we need to set certain guidelines globally, common guidelines which need to be adhered to. At the same time, as far as technology is concerned, it has managed to ensure that we continue to speak from different parts of our, from different locations on this one platform. That in itself shows how technology can be used positively. I think that should be the focus of how we move forward. In terms of how democracies look and how geopolitics will turn out, it is in a very, I would say, the situation is something that nobody can predict. We've seen confrontation, we have also seen cooperation. So in times to come, it will be, we're hoping that it will not be about unipolarity, but multipolarity and coexistence. America has just chosen a new president. So hopefully people reclaiming democracies is also something that would shape the times to come, and especially youth playing an active role in ensuring that democracy survive. I think that would be what should be up for discussion.
All right, thank you so much, Priyanka, for those thoughts. Jamie, I'd like to turn to you if you'd share your opening thoughts with us.
Thank you so much, Johanna, and selamat pagi, terima kasih to everybody. We're coming together in a moment of just tremendous fear and tremendous hope. Tremendous fear that we have this pandemic spreading across the globe, but hope that we're able to come together in forums like this. Hope that our technology looks like it's going to enable a new type of vaccine that could help us get through this mess. But the virus and the pandemic are in many ways a metaphor for the world that's changing around us, for the connection, for the danger, and the possibility. For the connection, hundreds of years ago, had there been this kind of outbreak, it would have died in the little small area in most cases where it began. The nature of our connection as a global community is what is facilitating the spread of this virus. Danger. It's clear that our world fundamentally failed to respond to this challenge, and we need to be brutally honest about what happened. This pandemic emerged in China, and China had a catastrophic failure, particularly over the first month. And that is what allowed a virus that could have been easily avoided, a pandemic that could have been easily avoided and suppressed, to become a global pandemic that has harmed so many people. My country, the United States, fundamentally failed in two ways. It failed to protect, and if your noise is on, Emmanuel, I think you should turn it off. You put yourself on mute. The United States fundamentally failed in two different, very significant ways. One was to protect our own population. Two was to not play the type of global role that the United States had played in suppressing smallpox and Ebola. And that, I think, significantly slowed the global response. And the World Health Organization failed to sound the alarm early enough and to have an emergency response. But it wasn't the fault of the WHO. It was the fault of all of us that we live in a world that is still dominated by nation states. Emmanuel, put yourself on mute. It's still dominated by nation states where we don't have institutions that can come together to solve global problems. And that's one of the biggest and most fundamental challenges that we face right now. There is a mismatch between global problems and not global solutions. Until we come together to solve that problem, that doesn't mean we need to get rid of our countries, but it certainly means that we need to learn from the virus. We need to recognize that the mutual responsibilities of interdependence must be the foundation of a new framework for solving problems. That's what my organization, One Shared World, is about, but that's what we all need to do. In the past, it's taken world wars like the 30 Years' War and the Second World War to finally convince us that we need new and better frameworks to solve problems. We can't wait around for that kind of catastrophe. In a spirit of hope and technology and youth and empowerment and inclusion, we need to come together to lay the foundations for the kind of world that we want to live in. And that's why these kinds of dialogues are so absolutely critical.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie, for that. Emmanuel, thank you for joining us. If you'd like to now unmute yourself and share your opening remarks with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from Ghana. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be joining this important dialogue, contributing to the Emerging Leaders Dialogue, a discussion on the future of democracy, reforms, and globalization after COVID-19. Certainly, as the earlier speaker rightly put it, Ghana, and for that matter, Africa, has come a long way, particularly within this pandemic. As you recall, Africa emerged stronger in many spheres in responding to the COVID-19. And that is really a critical reform that is needed for Africa re-emancipation. I'm particularly excited about this panel because certainly harnessing the demographic dividends and working with young people from across the continent, be it professionals from all aspects, be it health, political, and education, what I view will be very critical post-COVID-19. And I'm very much looking forward to this important dialogue.
Thank you for those remarks. So what we'll do now is move into questions. And for those of you in the audience, you can feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function in Zoom. I just want to note questions are going to be reviewed by the Global Town Hall administrative team and then relayed to me to ask the panel either individually or to the panel as a whole. So what I would like to do is start with a question to all of you, touching on something you've all raised about these concerns for the longer term impacts of the pandemic for future generations. In many countries, young people have already expressed dissatisfaction with established political parties and institutions. And that dissatisfaction is likely to be exacerbated by the measures that governing institutions have had to take to address this pandemic. So for example, by closing schools or closing down businesses, which limits employment opportunities. As we look forward to a world after COVID, how can incumbent political institutions better engage young people? Or do young people need to be engaged through non-traditional institutions or newer mechanisms of engagement altogether? And so for that, I'd actually, Priyanka, if we could start with you, and our other speakers could be on mute, that would be great. Thank you.
Firstly, I think the youth want to be stakeholders in governance. They want their voices heard. And we're seeing the same pattern across the globe, maybe because it rises out of uncertainties, the feeling that their voices have been ignored for far too long, or their futures have been compromised because of our selfish needs, that we are looking at industrialization, we are looking at using our natural resources without caring about how it will impact the next gen. We have young environmentalists talking, young activists who've left their schools and are talking about the importance and the need for governments to be able to listen and to frame policies which their futures depend on. COVID has been the biggest eye-opener globally with regards to how a pandemic, or forget a pandemic, uncertain policy making or non-visionary policy making can impact lives across the world. We live in a connected world, yet we've become so disconnected with what the reality on ground exists. And I think the young understand that. They want us to talk about climate change. They want us to talk about environment. They want to talk about economic opportunities. They want a more globalized world, but they're also very concerned about their own, being excluded out of, getting better opportunities. So I feel every government would need to be from henceforth, since there is a lot of political backlash too in terms of governance, they will have to take the stakeholders as far as the youngsters are concerned, the youth is concerned. They will be the stakeholders in this, be more sensitive to their needs, their requirements, and what they expect of their government. And those governments who do not listen to them will end up becoming the biggest losers and will have faced the biggest impact of post-COVID world. This is something which we all need to discuss strongly, and I think young leadership also needs to emerge from something like this. We've seen young leaders across the world come up with solutions, whether it was New Zealand, whether it was Canada, and various other countries, Finland, etc., has shown that young leaders can also take charge, be responsible, as well as make policies which are sensitive with regards to mental health, environment, education, opportunities economically. So these are things which we will, the world will be more concerned about, and the young need to step up and take charge.
Thank you, Priyanka. And what you were saying about, the need to speak to young people about the issues about which they're concerned, that's a challenge for governments at the local and national level. But Jamie, if I could turn to you, you've spent more time sort of looking at the more macro international institutional level, where, the challenge of understanding what are those issues of importance to young people could be even greater. Could you speak a little bit to what you think perhaps international institutions may need to do to be more responsive to young people and to better engage them?
So we always talk about how to engage young people, how to hear the voices of young people. And sometimes we do better and sometimes we do worse. The problem that we are facing, however, is not that we're not hearing the voices of young people. The problem that we're facing is that there are national and global structures of power. There are incentives that leaders face when making decisions. And so if we don't change those incentives, we can have all the rock concerts and all the rallies and all the speeches in the world. It won't mean anything. And that's why we really need to be focused in this conversation on an international level, on a global level. The reason we're not solving these big common problems is that our political leaders are doing exactly the job that we have hired them to do, which is to look out for our national interests. And whether it's that you can have an example for all of the big countries, whether it's the United States and the in my view, negative role in many ways that we've played over at least these last 4 years, but at other times, India scuttling the one big chance for an international climate change agreement, China making this pandemic possible and then destroying evidence and covering up fundamental issues regarding the origin. There's nobody is blameless. But if we want a different world, we can't have a world organized by leaders who are incentivized to look out for only our narrow interests. We need to create incentives on all of our leaders at every level and every institution to wisely balance our narrower national interest or niche interests as a constituency, as a consumer, whatever that is, with our common interest. And we need to build a political infrastructure that makes that possible. I mean, Gandhi in India understood that well. If you want to have change, it's not just about articulating principles. We need to build an empowered movement that creates incentives and pressures to realize those principles. On a global level, that's what One Shared World is all about. I certainly invite everybody listening to this to go to oneshared.world and sign the Declaration of Interdependence. Join on to our campaign calling on world leaders at the G20 who are meeting tomorrow, and the South African foreign minister who is going to be part of that process, calling on G20 leaders to guarantee that everyone on Earth has access to clean water, basic sanitation and hygiene, and essential pandemic protection by 2030, not as some kind of some kind of act of charity, but as the smartest and best investment that we can make in a safer world for everyone.
Thank you, Jamie. I'd like to stop and just acknowledge that Governor Ridwan Kamil has joined us. Thank you so much, sir. Welcome to our discussion. If I might, I'd like to turn to you now, Governor, to invite you to share your remarks on this topic. We've been discussing, you know, the ways in which the existing political institutions may be able to, how they can be sort of encouraged to better reach out to young people who are going to be significantly impacted by this COVID-19 pandemic and by the ways in which government entities have had to respond to the pandemic. And given your role in managing the crisis in your province in Indonesia, your perspectives on this would be very appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I'm coming a bit late. I just traveled 3 hours from the previous spot. I'm now at some remote village in my province. As you know, I'm managing 50 million people. Yeah, it's very big, the biggest province in Indonesia, twice the size of Australia, the size of South Korea. Yeah, so the similarity between me and the South Korean president is similar to handle 50 million people, but my budget is only 1% of his, so it's very challenging. But I think during COVID, I found the increase of digital use in my province increase is around 40%. Yeah, many sector are down, except the food business, logistic business, digital business, and also healthcare business. So digital increased 40%. During COVID, as you know, lots of restriction on mobility. So now people are voicing using the digital more often. I see lots of, for example, petition online for many issues, for example. And also during this COVID, as a leader, I see so many conflicting value between the decision maker, whether they want to make a decision based on populism, yeah, or a rational decision-making process. For example, I have a dilemma every day to open the school because the pressure from some parents, but also on the other hand, so many people also ask me not to do that because it could be a cluster on the school environment. So this is a routine dilemma today between populism leadership versus rationalism leadership. The third one during this COVID is I see strong what we call it economic solidarity because everybody got affected. So for some reason, solidarity value is higher and stronger during COVID, which is a good news. And hopefully we can create a better tolerance and also solidarity more. The government need to respond faster in our leadership hierarchy, as you know. The worst one is repressive governance. The second worst would be just defensive governance. A good one is a responsive governance. But the best one is a sensitive governance. So I'm trying to be sensitive. I'm monitoring the voice through digital, through media social, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So by reading passively the comments from my people, I respond, for example, helping to help social safety net, faster complaint increase in terms of how government handling the COVID and so on and so on. So I think for me, there is a digital impact on how we govern today in West Java also. And now everybody around the world, also in West Java, we have at least 6 new phenomenon. Number one is, as I said, increased sense of solidarity. Second, the stronger sense of personal and communal hygiene now become a norm. the stronger use of digital platform, and also the new definition of live, work, and play. Before live, work, and play, you are at the 3 different locations. Now people are getting used to only in one location where you can live, but also you can work and also play in the same location. And we find also the new resilient economy, as I said, in West Java. And last point is, I think we need to see and redefine the globalization post-COVID, because as you see in West Java, the number of import rate is getting uh, weaker, but the number of export is getting higher. So it means now there is a tendency my people try to survive using the local resources instead of typical before they rely also much to import. So I think this is also a challenge on how we balance the global trade, because the increase of localism is become also stronger. And we see also from economic perspective, many people now tend to invest not in one location. They don't want to put the whole egg in one basket. They now see the COVID, if they rely to heavily investing in one location, by having a lockdown, many investment becoming a problem. So the increase of spreading investment in smaller level also increasing. So I think last one is the increase of local tourism, because we now cannot rely on air travel. So I see the increase of local tourism. People travel, find happiness using ground transportation instead of airplane. So many changes in my conclusion. So as a leader, I must adjust, I must adapt, and hopefully globally also we can work together. I'm very happy to be invited in this forum, and hopefully we can share, because COVID teach us that we cannot solve this global humanity issue by ourselves. We need to work together. We need to be more understanding to one another in the name of humanity. So I think that's my point from West Java, Indonesia.
Thank you so much, sir, for those remarks. And you touched on several themes that I hope our other panelists will be able to pick up on as well. Emmanuel, I'm glad you're able to rejoin us. I'd like to ask you for your thoughts on the question that we had about how can political institutions better engage young people.
Right. Thank you very much. And let me begin by saying that if you look at the pandemic situation in Ghana and perhaps in Africa, you will agree with me that unlike the predictions that we have received, that Ghana and for that matter, the rest of African countries have done very much in responding to the COVID-19. Let me be very frank and say that this has been very much possible because of the role of young people in Ghana and in most African countries. If you see, Africa is a continent of young people, is the continent with the majority of young people. And so if you think about different sectors of our economy, you look at politics, you look at health, you look at education, you look at several other institutions, you will see that these are areas that are occupied by young people. So we have very young health professionals, doctors, nurses, who were very much at the forefront of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, who put their life on the line and work day and night to ensure that we can have a better healthcare system in Ghana. I think that is worth celebration. We need to commend the role and contributions of young people, not only in Ghana, but across the world, who have sacrificed their lives to combat the negative impact of COVID-19. But having said that, it's also important to recognize the fact that there are still some gaps that we need to fill. And going forward, it's important that political institutions and for that matter, our government are very much responsive to the needs of our young people. So you look at the healthcare sector, for instance, Africa loses quite a number of young people every year to other countries who are health professionals. After Ghana has invested heavily in training healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, and what have you, they migrate to other countries. And this is really a big drain on our health system. How do we ensure that we do not lose quite a number of these professionals to other countries? Apart from that, there are other sectors that also require investment. As you see in the area of education, for instance, during the lockdowns in Ghana and most African countries, schools were heavily impacted. Students were not able to access education. In part, we also saw difficulties in getting access to technology and being connected to the digital space. So these are some critical areas that I feel going forward, our government and our political institutions will have to invest in to ensure that not only are we preparing now, but we are very much ever ready for whatever will happen in the future, and that we are able to raise the next generation of critical thinkers. We are able to raise the next generation of professionals who we can rely on in the face of any pandemic into the future. So I think those are some remarks that I would like to make. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Emmanuel. I want to move on to sort of a slightly different topic, which is, this idea of that some of you have touched on of cross-sectoral cooperation. This is something that has been discussed a lot. As we've seen in the pandemic, there has been, in some ways quite unprecedented cooperation between governments and the private sector in efforts to combat the pandemic. I'm interested to hear from each of you how you think this is going. How has this cooperation fared so far? And what lessons do you think this holds for all of us moving forward? I'd like to invite Priyanka perhaps to start, knowing you need to log off. And I think, Priyanka, you've paid a lot of attention particularly to the role of private social media companies. So perhaps you could speak to that a little bit.
So I would like to say I would look at it in a positive way also, because in an interconnected world, it managed to bring in ideas, it managed to open us to suggestions where we could tackle situations better. Even lots of social media platforms also, I would say, lived up to the challenge of COVID times that we saw. It is about how governments adapted to technology, how governments used these platforms to be able to make an impact. And I would say that the state I come from in India, Maharashtra, managed to leverage technology brilliantly well, where we were connected to every single district of the state to be able to get real-time assessment of what was happening. Like I said, it was badly impacted. However, we used technology to ensure that we managed to, upgrade our not just our technology, but at least upgrade our infrastructure to be able to manage the large numbers that we saw. So in terms of, I would want to talk particularly about I come from Mumbai. In Mumbai, there's a very densely populated slum colony called Dharavi, which is, I would say, which is known worldwide for the dense population that it has. But, and people called it the ticking time bomb for India if COVID spread began there. But through technology, through using innovation, we managed to ensure, and citizen participation, we managed to ensure that Dharavi, passed through this entire phase extremely safely. And today it records only 11 COVID cases, which is a lesson, I think, which needs to be taken by all. In fact, WHO, United Nations, all commended this particular area that we managed to contain COVID. So all I'd like to mention is there are very positive ways where technology can be leveraged, and COVID left us with no other option. However, the negatives would be that it created a huge divide. Economic divide also was very apparent, like Emmanuel was speaking, that many Africans also were left out because they could not study due to, having to depend on technology. Similarly, in India, there were many instances where those who are from economically poorer backgrounds, they faced the challenge. We've seen many girls who could not continue with their education. We've seen many poor families not being able to manage to educate all their children. So these are real-time challenges that we would need to address. And I think we are moving towards more empathetic governance while we are talking about local products and dependence on it, and understanding that there are lots of things we can live without, and it could impact global trade. But at the same time, interdependence is going to increase, and those governments that are empathetic, which are open to ideas, which are inclusionary, will find more space, and I would say would find more acceptance. And most political parties need to gear up to that.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. Jamie, if I could turn to you for this, you know, in is there a way that perhaps this private-public cooperation, is this a way to get at some of the balancing that you were talking about earlier?
Well, certainly, if one thing should be absolutely clear is that solving these big global problems like the pandemic, it requires all hands on deck. And in the United States, we used to have an idea of public-private partnerships, and then we fell in love with our own ideology that everything is just a small group of business people working out of their garages. And I think this problem is showing us that kind of ideology just doesn't work. We have to quote Deng Xiaoping, it's not a black cat or a white cat. We need to find the cat that catches mice. We need to draw on the greatest expertise of our universities, the innovation of our businesses, the leadership of our government, the participation of people, because I talked earlier about solving the water, sanitation, and hygiene problem. That's not just a top-down G20 challenge, it's a bottom-up challenge as well. We need to bring all of the perspectives together to solve our problems together, and we need to build structures and institutions that make that possible.
Thank you so much. And with that, we unfortunately are going to have to end our discussion here. We've reached the end of our time, and we'll be moving on to our next speaker. I would like to thank all of you for your contributions here. I think, you know, some of the issues that have come up in our discussion are things that I hope, you know, all of us, everyone who's listening, will be food for thought as you think about what should be some of these next steps that are taken. I think particularly as we try to ensure that the world that comes after this, as we're talking to the young people in the audience today, hopefully you'll all feel engaged and energized to take up your role as well and ensure that you're working on some of these issues moving forward. Thank you again to FPCI. Thank you to the 4 panelists for your contributions here and for the work that you are doing. Thank you all very much.